So why am I saying the Kalam is dead? What's the end of the Kalam? Well, it should have been dead from the beginning as an argument for the existence of God. Because what is also undeniable about the Kalam is that it never mentions God.
The first thing worth noting is that this is the entire argument, and yet the word God appears nowhere.
The Kalam states, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's all of it. Other arguments are often used in conjunction with the Kalam in order to support the idea of a specific God, but still, the Kalam is well recognized as an argument for theism. Strangely enough, this supposed argument for God is not actually about any deity at all. Even if the entire argument was granted, it still wouldn't support theism.
The Kalam Cosmological Argument is not an argument for the existence of God. That's an undeniable fact.
Well, we had a good run. But it's undeniable the Kalam is not an argument for the existence of God. So the Kalam is officially ended. It's ended. It's done. It's done. It's done. No, but in seriousness, this is like the worst objection, objectively the worst objection to the Kalam Cosmological Argument that exists in any possible world. I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and you're watching Capturing Christianity, which is a ministry aimed at exposing the intellectual side of Christian belief. All right, so why is this objectively the worst objection to the Kalam Cosmological Argument? I'm going to limit myself to just 3 reasons. And as a reminder, the objection we're looking at here is that the Kalam is not an argument for the existence of God. The first reason is that there is no the Kalam Cosmological Argument. This is actually a point that Matt Dillahunty appreciates in a related context.
There's no the cosmological argument, the moral argument, the teleological argument. What there are arguments for the existence of God that are moral, teleological, ontological, etc.
Matt was so close. All he had to do was apply this thinking to the Kalam itself. Like, that's it. The Kalam should be thought of as like a category. It shouldn't be thought of as some univocal argument that has no variety or variation. William Lane Craig has his version of the Kalam, but his version is not the only version that exists. His version came nearly 1,500 years after the first version, which was put forth by Christian theologian John Philoponus. I used my own version in my fairly recent debate with Stephen Woodford. Al-Kindi had his own version. Al-Ghazali had his own version. Dr. Andrew Loke has his version. Dr. Jacob Erasmus has his own version. There's a lot of different versions. Defenders of the Kalam each have their own way that they like to formulate the argument. Hence, there is no the Kalam. There are only versions of the Kalam. So you might be wondering, like, why is it important to point out that there are different versions of the Kalam? The reason is that some of these versions explicitly mention God. If I was Dr. Craig, I'd be able to pronounce this name exactly how it's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm going to do my best. So Jacob Erasmus, Dr. Erasmus, back in 2017, published a book called The Kalam Cosmological Argument, a Reassessment. So here's the formulation that he used in this book. Premise 1, the universe came into existence. Premise 2, if the universe came into existence, then God brought it into existence. Conclusion, therefore, God brought the universe into existence. What's cool about Dr. Erasmus's version is that it obviously mentions God. It's very explicit, mentions it in the second premise and also in the conclusion. And I should also, I feel like I should mention this explicitly, that this version existed at least 2 years prior to any of the clips that I showed at the beginning of this video. So, and I only mention that because I want to sort of do away with the objection that this wasn't available during the time that these other clips were recorded. It was. Now, let's look at the term Kalam a little bit closer because that's also important here. Kalam-style arguments haven't always been referred to as Kalam, right? Dr. Craig introduced the term Kalam, and you can get this if you like go listen to his stuff on the Kalam. He introduced this term because he wanted to pay homage to the Islamic medieval tradition that sort of birthed the most robust defense of the argument at the time. Al-Kindi, for example, he didn't refer to his argument as like the Kalam, and nor did Al-Ghazali. What I think is going on here is that because Dr. Craig's version is so popular, it's so well known, people kind of assume that it's like the only version that's ever existed. And this actually leads me to my second reason why this is the worst objection to the Kalam that's ever existed. Secondly, Kalam-style arguments are usually presented in 2 different stages. And by usually, I mean like all the way back to the Middle Ages. The first stage argues for the existence of a first cause or like a cause of the universe. And the second stage says that this first cause is God, or it's something very similar to God. Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, Dr. William Lane Craig, Dr. Andrew Loke, Dr. Jacob Erasmus, myself, we've all defended stage 2 arguments. Dr. Craig, for just to take one example, has 4 independent arguments in his work, and you don't typically hear all of these arguments in like a public debate that he does, but in his work, he has 4 different arguments. That's 8. He has 4 different arguments that the first cause is personal. So one objection that might get raised here is that stage 2 arguments are not actually part of the Kalam. These are additional arguments that are sort of tagged on after the fact. So I think this objection is pretty silly, actually, but I want to frame my response to it in a dichotomy to show how this doesn't actually help the objector at all. So here's the dichotomy. It's really simple. Either stage 2 is part of the Kalam or it's not. Let's take a look at the first horn. Stage 2 is part of the Kalam. If this is true, then the original objection fails. Remember that stage 2 are arguments that connect the first cause to God. And so obviously this would be, the Kalam would be an argument for the existence of God. So now let's take a look at the second horn. Stage 2 is not part of the Kalam. Well, if this is true, then so what? So what? How does this actually help the objector dialectically? It doesn't. It doesn't at all. Like, stage 2 arguments exist. That's undeniable. They've got to be addressed. Calling them additional arguments doesn't show that they're false or fail or fallacious. That doesn't follow at all. So even if this objection, even if the second horn is true, it has no dialectical force at all. So we haven't actually asked the question like which horn is true. We've only been looking at the consequences of the horn. But in my view, I think that the second horn, like there's no reason to accept the second horn of this dilemma. There is no good reason at all whatsoever to exclude stage 2 arguments from being categorized as part of the Kalam. The reason for this is actually historical. So like every notable presentation of the Kalam, stretching all the way back to Al-Kindi, includes a stage 2 case. And again, like remember that the Kalam, these arguments weren't called Kalam Cosmological Arguments back in the day. They were just called first cause arguments. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you notice that I actually made a mistake in setting up my dichotomy. I treated the Kalam as a single argument instead of a family of arguments. So let's think back to Dr. Erasmus's version. It's undeniable, I'm going to be using that term a lot, it's undeniable that this syllogism incorporates both stages 1 and 2 into one syllogism. God is mentioned in the second premise and also in the conclusion. So when it comes to this additional arguments objection, if you want to call it an objection, let's put aside what I've already said about this objection. The very best that the objector can do is to say that some versions of the Kalam Cosmological Argument don't include a stage 2 case, but others do. Just think about Dr. Erasmus's version. What the objector can't say is that stage 2 is not part of the Kalam, in part because there is no the Kalam. Thirdly and finally, how is this even supposed to be an argument against the Kalam Cosmological Argument in the first place? Let's suppose that Kalam-style arguments can only refer to stage 1 arguments. That's what the original objection requires. Now, I've already shown that this is a silly thing to do, but let's just assume that it's true for the sake of argument. This objection is really only saying that Kalam-style arguments, which by that we mean stage 1 arguments, are not stage 2 arguments. In other words, stage 1 arguments are not stage 2 arguments. Yeah, so that's true. But how is this supposed to be an objection to the Kalam at all? This is not an objection to any stage 1 argument, right? Nor is it an objection to any stage 2 argument. This objection is basically only saying that one stage is not the other stage. If you still can't see why I'm calling this objectively the worst objection to the Kalam Cosmological Argument that exists, consider the following analogy. Suppose that you and a friend are going to meet at a restaurant on the 3rd floor of some old building. So you get there a little bit early and you call your friend, you say, hey, look, in order to get to the restaurant that's on the 3rd floor, you've got to climb 2 flights of stairs. And then your friend responds, but the first flight of stairs won't get me to the restaurant. And so you reply, oh, well, I thought I said that you've got to climb 2 flights in order to get to the restaurant. Didn't I say 2? Yeah, you said that, they reply back. But what I'm telling you is that I can't get to the restaurant by just climbing the first set of stairs. Now imagine on this basis that your friend says this is a good reason to doubt your instructions.
See you next time. Bye-bye.